As I alluded to you, we are at the beginning of a summer series of messages that I'm going to call Stone Tablets in a Wireless World. Sometimes people think, are the Ten Commandments relevant today? Are they necessary today? Do we need to keep them today? And my answer is yes, because Jesus himself said that he did not come to abolish them, but to fulfill them. And in like manner, giving us the direction that God's given us to live. I was thinking about the very first job I ever had. It was frying hamburgers at Toledo Speedway. My uncle, or my best friend's uncle, owned the concessions during that era. And he hired me, along with other high school students, to work in the stand. Well, the business was always brisk, and the preliminary races were being run. It came time for the feature race. The stand was basically customer-free, so Mike and I were allowed to go over to the track, into the grandstands, kind of at the entryway, and we'd watch the feature race because the stand was virtually customer-free. As we would go over there, we'd keep an eye on the stand to make sure no customer needed a hamburger, but usually during the feature, no one left the stands. But I'll never forget my first feature race. These cars were thundering around the half-mile banked oval in Toledo at these tremendous speeds. The noise was deafening. It was a new experience for me. It was the first time I'd ever seen cars race like this. But Mike was a veteran at these races, and I had a lot of questions that I peppered him with. Now, I'm sure some of these questions were pretty dumb, but I asked them anyway. And one of the things I said to him was, how does the guy in the lead know what's happening to him, behind him? Does he have a rearview mirror? He said, as he laughed, he said, there are no mirrors, but it doesn't matter what's happening if you're in first place. Just keep your eyes on the finish line and drive as hard as you can. I thought, isn't that the case with life? As we launch into our Stone Tablets in a Wireless World series today, we focus on the first commandment. And it strikes me that if we keep this commandment to put God first, it doesn't matter what's happening behind us. We need to have a laser focus on the finish line as we drive hard to know God in all his glory. The first commandment is very simple. It says, you shall have no other gods before me. Now, during this summer series, we're going to learn the commandments in consecutive order. And to make it memorable, I'm going to teach you how to remember each of the commandments simply by using your 10 fingers. Moms and dads, I would encourage you to spend this week and each week teaching your kids these finger exercises, so by the end of the summer, they too will know all of God's 10 commandments. By doing so, you're going to exactly do what you're told to do in Scripture by passing along the commandments to the next generation. And each week, what we'll do is we'll learn the commandment we're going to study and then review them as well. Today's going to be pretty simple. The first command is to simply hold up your first finger, your pointer finger, point to the sky, and say, one God, no other gods. Go ahead, let's practice that. One God, no other gods. Very good. I may quiz you a little later to see if you remember that. Now, don't forget to practice all week. You get a gold star. But before we look at the commandment, I'm going to look at the preamble of the commandments. Before we do that, I want to share some principles put forth by Philip Ryken, and it will help us understand how to apply it. You can fill it in. It's kind of a busy study guide, but I'll go through this quickly to help you understand what we need to understand. Rule number one is that we need to follow the biblical rule. What does the rest of the Bible say about each commandment? And we'll find all throughout Scripture there is evidence that these commandments are permeated all through Scripture. Rule number two, follow what's called the inside-outside rule. In other words, am I living out this command internally as well as externally? You see, we can't focus on the outward action only, but we need to focus as well on the inward attitude. Jesus did this in a Sermon on the Mount when he equated lust with adultery and anger with murder. Rule number three, he says, is the two-sided rule. That's where a sin is forbidden, the corresponding duty is required. And where duty is required, the corresponding sin is forbidden. And in a sense, when a particular vice is condemned, a particular virtue is commanded. For instance, the command that forbids murder simultaneously requires the preservation of life. The true intent tells us what to do as well as not to do. Rule number 4 is to follow the rule of categories. Each commandment stands for a whole category of sins. He says it governs not only the specific sin that is mentioned, but all the sins that lead up to it and all the supposedly lesser sins of the same kind. In other words, giving too much time to a possession or a sport or a hobby can lead to outright idol worship. A white lie is still a lie. And then the 5th rule is to follow the brother's keeper rule. In other words, don't encourage someone else to do what God has told us not to do, or keep them from doing something that God has commanded. Without a doubt, moms and dads shape their children's moral character, both for good and for evil. This also means that we need to watch our example. It certainly means to stop someone from gossiping, because if you don't, you'll be drawn into it as well. So we need to be careful about sharing in someone else's sin or leading them astray by your own sin. If you remember last week, we concluded that the commandments are important, but they're impossible to keep. That's why we need to put our faith in Jesus Christ, the impeccable one, who kept them all and took upon himself our penalty for not keeping them. One pastor said it like this: we are not saved by keeping the 10 Commandments, however, we are kept safe by them. Kind of reminds me of the story of a little boy who came home from his Sunday school class. His dad asked where he learned, and he bubbled with excitement. He said, "It was great, Dad. We learned all about the 10 Commandos." Well, you know what? He's right. God's commandos keep us safe and secure. The law reveals the righteousness of God, but it cannot produce righteousness in our hearts. Commandments don't give us life, but they certainly guide our life. Now, the 10 Commandments are an excellent summary of 10 divine rules for human conduct. As I was doing my studies, the Bible Knowledge Commentary calls them rules, and there's 10 things, and I have space for you. We're not going to dwell on them, but I'm just going to kind of go through them with you. The first is the rule of religion. One God, no idols. Number 2 is worship, that we only bow down to God. Number 3 is reverence. Number 4 is time, how we do our Sabbath. Number 5 is authority, how we react and respond to our parents. Number 6 is life. Number 7 is purity. Number 8 is property, thou shalt not steal. Number 9 is tongue, thou shalt not lie. And then finally, we should covet with the word contentment. I want to begin with Exodus 20. Verses 1 through 3. Right at the beginning, we read, "And God spoke all these words, I am the Lord your God, who brought you out of Egypt, out of the land of slavery. You shall have no other gods before me." Now, it's important that you understand that the first 2 verses of Exodus 20 are often overlooked. But they're very important in establishing the context of the 10 Commandments. So let me take a look at the first 2 verses. The first is the word revelation that I want us to be aware of. It says in verse 1, "And God spoke all these words." Now remember, these people have been in Egypt for 400 years. They needed to hear from God. They'd been wild beyond measure in Exodus 19, but now they needed words to know who God was and what he wanted from them. They knew he was powerful as they saw the smoke and the flashes of lightning, as they heard the thunder and the sound of trumpet on the mountain. But now these words express God's character and his demands. You see, my friends, these words come from the God who speaks and were written by his very finger, according to Exodus 31:18. You see, there we read, when the Lord finished speaking to Moses on Mount Sinai, he gave him 2 stone tablets of the testimony. The tablets of stone inscribed by the finger of God. He was left-handed, I'm sure, the finger of God. See, God has revealed himself, and he has also entered into a relationship. The second context to these Ten Commandments is the relationship that he's established with us. He says, I am the Lord your God. Now we know that this is the word Yahweh, and it was the name that God used to reveal himself to Moses in Exodus 3:14. And the title refers to God as the self-existent one. Literally, it means, I am who I am. Albert Mohler calls this first-person intimacy and first-person authority. And that word your is in the second-person singular pronoun. God is powerful, but he is also personal. He's revealed himself to each one personally so that everyone can know him relationally. And we see this personal relationship reinforced all throughout the commandments. In verse 5 it says, for I, the Lord your God, am a jealous God. In verse 7 it says, you shall not misuse the name of the Lord your God. In verse 10 he says, but the seventh day is a Sabbath to the Lord your God. And in verse 12 he says, honor your father and your mother so that you may live long in the land the Lord your God is giving you. God's love gives limits. Sometimes love means saying no. God knows what's best for us, so he lays out laws of love. And the next thing in your outline says God's precepts are given to protect us. And understand this about the Ten Commandments. The first four, they protect our relationship with God. The next five protect our relationship with each other. And the final command against coveting protects us from ourselves. Now, I know when you talk to people about Christianity, I know when you say to them, I'm a believer, would you be interested? They usually say, I don't want anything to do with Christianity because it's nothing but a bunch of rules of thou shalt nots. That's not true. I know many chafe under the commandments, but I want you to think about it in another way. They are short and simple, and they're designed to give us freedom. Remember the words found in 1 John 5. It says, this is love for God, to obey his commands. And then he says, his commands are not burdensome. Came across the statement in a blog by John Markham. He says, it's not about what I do, it's about who he is. It's not about me performing, it's all about God and who he is. And I want you to think about it like this. We get to have a relationship with him because he is a God who has revealed himself to us. The third context in this preamble is redemption. He goes on and he says, who brought you out of Egypt, out of the land of slavery. I want you to remember this, friends. Love precedes law. God rescued them before giving them requirements. And this is so important for us to keep in mind. When we focus on our own redemption, on God's amazing grace, how can we not but obey him? God said it like this in Exodus 19. You yourselves have seen what I did to Egypt, and how I carried you on eagle's wings, and brought you to myself. Now, if you obey me fully and keep my covenant, then out of all nations, you will be my treasured possessions. Think about this, my friends. God made you. God paid for you. God purchased you and brought you out of slavery to sin. God owns you. And he certainly has a right to lay down some regulations, doesn't he? Paul said it like this in 1 Corinthians 6. He says, do you not know that your body is a temple of the Holy Spirit who is in you, whom you have received from God? You are not your own. You were bought at a price. Therefore, honor God with your body. And when we remember what we once were, we should delight in obeying God's commands. Look at some other passages that speak of this. In Deuteronomy 15, God says, remember that you were slaves in Egypt, and the Lord your God redeemed you. That is why I give you this command today. In Leviticus 26, he says, I am the Lord your God who brought you out of Egypt so that you would no longer be slaves to the Egyptians. I broke the bars of your yoke and enabled you to walk with heads held high. Psalm 116 says, O Lord, truly I am your servant. I am your servant, the son of your maidservant. You have freed me from my chains. And then Hosea 13 says, but I am the Lord your God, who brought you out of Egypt. You shall acknowledge no God but me, no Savior except me. And let me help you understand something. What God requires is based on who He is and what He has done for us. And because of His revelation, our relationship with Him and our redemption, we must, we shall, and we will do what He requires. Don't you agree? So in order to get at the meaning of the first commandment, let me ask you a question. Assuming that most of you would say that God is first in your life, here's a question I want to ask you. What's number 2 in your life? What's number 2 in your life? If you want to shout some answers out, that's okay. If you want to keep that to yourself, I'm fine with that as well. But I want you to realize this. Whatever you declare as number 2 is the biggest threat to what you say is number 1 in your life. Did you hear that? What you say is number 2 is the biggest threat to what you say is number 1 in your life. Let's go on. The last context is requirement. God says, commandment number 1, you shall have no other gods before me. Now, I need to make an obvious observation. The 10 Commandments begin with God, not us. They start vertical, not horizontal. And that's because we have to get things right with God before our relationship with others will be right. And the order of words in Hebrew is strong. It says, there shall not be to you any other gods before me. And that word before can mean above, or over, or against, or in opposition to the face of God. I want to break this down just a bit more because that phrase before me can be understood in 2 ways. Before my face is one way. In this sense, it means to have no other gods in front of me or in my presence. Literally, it forbids us from bringing idols into the place God is worshipped. And secondly, we can look at it as in my face. And this phrase has an idea of putting something in someone's face. When we don't give God our total and exclusive allegiance, it's like insulting Him to His face. And in fact, God is saying, you dare not bring even the acknowledgement of any other so-called God in my face. And the sense is not that you can have other gods as long as God is your favorite. No, there is to be no other God allowed at all. There can be no competition for allegiance. Nothing can be tolerated that takes us away from bowing before Him with our lives. I want to push this just a little bit further. It's common cliche to say God first, others second, me last, or God family works out. But here's how weighty this first command is. God first, period. There is no second. God doesn't want to be the chief thing. He wants to be everything. And the point is this. It's all or nothing. Someone once said, if God is not Lord of all, He's not Lord at all. Jesus kind of said it like this in Matthew 6. No one can serve 2 masters. You cannot serve God and money. Warren Wiersbe has this insight. He says, for the Jews to worship another God would be to declare war on Jehovah and incur His wrath. And while we may teach our children to share, there's one thing that God will not share, according to Isaiah 42. He says, I am the Lord, that's my name. I will not give my glory to another or my praise to idols. He will not share the stage with anyone else. And this harkens us back to one of the phrases that rose out of the Reformation. It said, Soli Deo Gloria, which means glory to God alone. You see, for centuries, God's people were surrounded by polytheism and had no doubt rubbed off on them. They prayed to the rain god when they needed rain. When their wives were barren, they cried out to the fertility gods. When they saw God's amazing outpouring of power through the 10 plagues and the pyrotechnic explosion on Mount Sinai, what one commandment did God want them to hear first? That He is God and that there is no other. You shall have no other gods before me. So I'm going to transition to close the message with how do we keep this command? Number 1, let's begin with the premise. There have always been many gods vying for our attention and our allegiance. And here are some from the past that are still alive and well today. There's the God of power. The god Baal in the Old Testament represented power. But you know what? Baal was put in this place by Elijah on top of Mount Carmel. People today still pursue the God of power. There's the God of pleasure. The idol Ashtaroth was worshipped through all sorts of sexual immorality. This God is still bowed down to today and has called such things as pornography and prostitution and human trafficking. There's the God of prosperity, the Syrian deity they called Mammon. It was all about materialism and money. Someone referred to this as a gift of grab. How about the God of pragmatism? Molech called worshippers to do whatever it took, regardless of whether it was right or wrong. Specifically, Molech followers sacrificed their children by throwing them in a fire. When you count the babies that have been sacrificed to the idol of abortion in America and add in those who were abused and neglected, it's obvious that Molech is alive and well today. If it works, it makes everything more convenient and less problematic, it must be good, right? No. How about the god of play? The Greek god Hermes represented athletic prowess and sport. Many in our culture today are worshiping at the shrine of sports. In addition to these idols, our culture worships a trinity of false gods that we would call diversity or tolerance or pluralism. Friends, none of this is new. Solomon talked about it in Ecclesiastes. He said, what has been will be again. What has been done will be done again. There is nothing new under the sun. But here's the deal. You and I are made to worship. And if we don't worship God alone, we will find something or someone else to give our lives to. The second in this outline is prediction in applying it. Whatever we give ourselves to that is not God will ultimately disappoint us. We carry our idols, but then they in the end become a burden to us. They can't carry us and they'll crush us. Let me read these 10 verses from Isaiah 46 to kind of illustrate this. It says, Baal bows down, Nebo stoops low. Their idols are borne by beasts of burden. The images that are carried about are burdensome, a burden for the weary. They stoop and bow down together, unable to rescue the burden. They themselves go off into captivity. Listen to me, O house of Jacob, all you who remain in the house of Israel, you whom I have upheld since you were conceived and have carried since your birth. Even to your old age and gray hairs, I am he. I am he who will sustain you. I have made you and I will carry you. I will sustain you and I will rescue you. To whom will you compare me or count me equal? To whom will you liken me that we may be compared? Some pour out gold from their bags and weigh out silver on the scales. They hire a goldsmith to make it into a god. And they bow down and worship him. They lift it to their shoulders and carry it. They set it up in its place, and there it stands. From that spot it cannot move. Though one cries out to it, it does not answer. It cannot save him from his troubles. Remember this. Fix it in your mind. Take it to heart, you rebels. Remember the former things, those of long ago. I am God, and there is no other. I am God, and there is none like me. I make known the end from the beginning, from ancient times what is still to come. I say, my purpose will stand, and I will do all that I please. It's not a harmless thing to give your life to a false god. Because according to 1 Corinthians 10:20, behind every idol is an evil spirit. They are designed to take everything you have, to leave you addicted, to leave you crushed and devastated. There was a Wall Street Journal article a while back about a guy who's responsible for the current Greek yogurt craze. I'm caught up into that, okay? I love my Greek yogurt. After heaping accolades on him for his innovative processes, and out-of-the-box thinking, it was really sad when I read about this man's closing comments. It's a picture of what happens when we give ourselves to something or someone other than God himself. Responding to a question about what advice he would give others looking to start a manufacturing business, he said this: you have to have passion because it requires a lot of sacrifices. I sacrificed my family life. I lived in the plant for the last 2 years. I still live in the plant. For what? For overpriced yogurt that tastes like sour cream. Number 3 is a promise. God will smash your idols if you'll let him. One of the great illustrations of this is found in 1 Samuel chapter 5. It says, after the Philistines had captured the ark of God, they took it from Ebenezer to Ashdod. Then they carried the ark into Dagon's temple and set it beside Dagon. When the people of Ashdod rose early the next day, there was Dagon fallen on his face on the ground before the ark of the Lord. They took Dagon and put him back in his place. But the following morning when they rose, there was Dagon fallen on his face on the ground before the ark of the Lord. His head and hands had been broken off and were lying on the threshold. Only his body remained. Let me share with you this promise from God. When we try to prop something up in our lives out of love, he knocks it down and shows how ineffective and lifeless it really is. So if you want to be free from false gods, then bring the true God into your life. You don't have to get rid of them on your own. In fact, you can't because they're too powerful. Let God take care of that. But you have to bring him into the temple of your own heart. And when you do, Dagon will be destroyed, Baal will be busted, Ashtaroth will be annihilated, Mammon will be mangled, Molech will be no more, Zeus and Hermes will be gone, and finally your altar to self will be smashed to smithereens. But let me give you a caution. If you keep reading that passage instead of repenting, the people moved the Ark of the Covenant. They found it more convenient to get rid of God than to throw their broken idol away. And some of us are prone to do the same thing. Instead of allowing God to clean out the idol factory of our hearts, we'll look for ways to shut God down. And when things fall apart, some of us get rid of God instead of realizing that maybe God is smashing our idols in order to get our attention. Let him into the temple of your heart, and he will destroy Dagon and whatever else works there. Came across two questions that can help us determine how well we're doing in keeping the first commandment. The first question is the love test. What or whom do you love? Remember, God demands your absolute affection. Origen, writing in the 3rd century, said, "What each one honors before all else, what before all things he admires and loves, this for him is God." And then Thomas Watson said, "To love anything more than God is to make it a God." And then the second question, the trust test, is what or whom do you trust? My friends, God demands our exclusive allegiance. Martin Luther once wrote these words. He said, "Whatever thy heart clings to and relies upon, that is properly thy God." And Ligon Duncan said, "That which we love and serve and desire and long after and aim for and strive for and think of the most is our God." And there are many idols that call out for our love and for our trust. The supreme deity of our day is the God or goddess of self. Robert Battle, in his book on American religion called Habit of the Heart, tells about an interview he had with a woman named Sheila. And this is what she said. "I believe in God. I'm not a religious fanatic. I can't remember the last time I went to church. My faith has carried me a long way. It's Sheilaism. Just my own little voice." And Bella adds, "This suggests the logical possibility of over 325 million American religions, one for each of us." Riken writes, "What do we love? We are infatuated with ourselves. Whom do we trust? We believe in ourselves. We say that we want to serve God, but we spend most of our time thinking about our own needs." And so, how can we be delivered from the worship of other gods and ultimately from the worship of ourselves? Simply put, love God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength, and trust fully in His Son, the Lord Jesus Christ. Only true love for God can release you from bondage to other affections, and the only way to replace all the things you are trusting in is through a total trust commitment to Jesus Christ. But it demands a choice. Joachim Gomez says, "Choosing for the Lord always means making a choice that excludes every other possibility. We never get rid of idols if we are not really converted to the only true God." Look at 1 John 5:20. It says, "Dear children, keep yourself from idols." And then Joshua, in that famous 24 verses 14 and 15, he says, after saying all these words, he says, "But as for me and my house, we will serve the Lord." Write this down. It's the last thing in your study guide. God is Lord of all, or He's not Lord at all. Are you in the race with me today? If so, are you looking ahead by making God your absolute allegiance? Are you keeping your eyes on the finish line, or are you looking around and behind? God asks for our worship of him. He deserves it. And when we give it to him, we'll win. Father, you are the one true, only God. Forgive us if we don't recognize that. Help us, O Lord, to put you first in everything. Help us, Father, to honor this first commandment and to understand you to be the holy God, the creator of all things, the one who reached out to bring salvation to us. And you did so by sending the only one to keep all the commandments, your Son Jesus, the Lord of Lords and the King of Kings. Thank you for today and your word. And we pray this in Christ's name.